She had spent 10 years learning how to disappear, and she had almost convinced herself it was working. But the moment that door swung open and the scent hit her like a memory she'd buried alive, Lily Carter understood that some things don't stay gone. He was standing right there, older, sharper, and looking at her like a man who had never stopped searching. What happens when the love you left behind becomes the life you're now paid to serve? If this story is already pulling at something inside you, hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're listening from. It means everything to us. The marble floors of the Cole residence reflected everything. The chandelier light, the floor-to-ceiling windows framing a steel-gray Manhattan morning, and Lily Carter pushing her cleaning cart through the main corridor like someone who had learned a long time ago that the best way to survive a place like this was to become invisible inside. She was 28 years old and dressed in the standard grey uniform of Prestige Home Services, fitted pants, a collared shirt with the company logo stitched above her left breast, sneakers that had seen better days. Her dark hair was pulled back tightly, not because she liked it that way, but because loose hair in a job like this was just one more thing that could get in the way. She wore no jewelry, no perfume, nothing that could be noticed. That was the point. The penthouse suite on the 42nd floor of the building was empty most mornings, or so she'd been told when she took the assignment 3 weeks ago. The owner, a name she hadn't bothered to Google, was reportedly always traveling. She had cleaned his office twice already, without ever crossing paths with him, which suited her perfectly. She liked the quiet. She liked the absence of people who might look at her too long and start asking questions she didn't want to answer. She stopped her cart outside the main office and reached for the door handle. That was when it hit her, not a sound, not a movement, a smell. Warm sandalwood cut with something dry and clean, like the inside of a library on a summer day. A scent so specific, so coded into her nervous system, that her hand froze on the handle and every muscle in her body went still before her brain had even caught up. No, she knew that scent the way she knew her own heartbeat. She knew it from a different life, a smaller one, before Manhattan, before the uniform, before the 10-year silence she had convinced herself was healing. She knew it from a boy who used to lean against a chain-link fence in Brooklyn, with his hands in the pockets of a worn hoodie, looking at her like she was the only interesting thing in a 40-block radius. Her hand finally moved. The door swung open. He was standing at the window with his back to her, phone pressed to his ear, dressed in a charcoal suit so well-tailored it looked like it had been sewn onto his body. His shoulders were broader than she remembered. His posture carried a kind of quiet authority that hadn't existed in the boy she'd known. When he turned slowly, the way people do when they feel the weight of someone's attention, the phone came down from his ear without him ending the call. Ethan Cole looked at her, and for 3 full seconds neither of them breathed. The recognition was not immediate. It moved across his face in stages. Confusion first, then a sharpening focus, then something she couldn't name. Something that sat between disbelief and the particular ache of a wound that had never fully closed. Lily. His voice was low, not a question, a confirmation, like a man saying the name of something he thought he'd imagined. Mr. Cole. Hers was flat, professional. The syllables clipped clean of everything they had once carried. She turned back to her cart and reached for the supply caddy. I can come back later if you're on a call. I'm not. He set the phone, face down on the desk. Not anymore. The office smelled entirely of him and the sandalwood, the clean paper, the faint trace of espresso from a cup still steaming on the corner of his desk. The room was all clean lines and glass, a modern workspace that looked more like an architectural photograph than a place where a real person spent their days. A MacBook sat open beside the espresso. 2 monitors flanked it. On the bookshelf behind him, between design awards and industry titles, there was a small framed photo she couldn't quite make out from where she stood. She didn't let herself look too long. I didn't know you worked here, he said. It's a large building. She moved toward the window ledge and began wiping it, down with practiced efficiency, her back half turned, her hands steady through sheer force of will. People don't always know who's in the next room. He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was closer than expected. "You could have told me, when you saw my name on the contract." "I didn't see your name on the contract." She glanced at him sidelong. "I don't read the names." "I read the floor plans." Ethan nodded once, slowly, like someone filing that information away for later. He didn't move toward her, but he didn't move away either. He just stood there in his expensive suit, with his hands loose at his sides, watching her work with an expression she absolutely refused to interpret. "It's good to see you, Lily," he said finally. She said nothing, but her jaw tightened, and her cloth hand slowed, just barely, against the glass. The next morning came in shades of pale gold, the kind of early Manhattan light that filters through glass towers and lands, sideways across polished floors, making everything look almost gentle. Lily arrived at 7:14 a.m., earlier than her scheduled start, because arriving early meant leaving early, and leaving early meant less chance of running into him again. She had told herself on the subway ride over that yesterday was simply an anomaly, a collision of bad timing and worse luck. She had handled it professionally. She had kept her hands steady and her voice flat, and she had walked out of that office without giving him a single thing he could use. She almost believed it. The executive floor was quiet when she arrived, the kind of quiet that felt intentional, like the building itself was holding its breath. She started at the far end of the corridor, working methodically toward the main office, telling herself she would be done and gone before anyone in a tailored suit appeared. She was wiping down the hallway mirror in a tall, frameless panel mounted between two glass doors when she heard his footsteps. Not rushed, not loud, just steady, unhurried. The particular rhythm of someone who owned every floor they walked on. She didn't turn around. "You're here early," Ethan said. "So are you." She kept her eyes on the mirror, the cloth moving in slow, even circles, and then she made the mistake. She looked up. The mirror gave her the whole picture at once. Him, 2 feet behind her, jacket off, sleeves rolled to the forearm, holding a ceramic mug in one hand, and watching her with an expression that had no business being that unguarded at 7 in the morning. And hurt, and smaller than she felt in her own head, grey uniform, hair pulled back, hands that had gone completely still without her permission. They stayed like that for a moment, both of them caught in the reflection, neither pretending to look away. "Lily." His voice was quieter now, the professional edge from yesterday replaced by something that sat much closer, to the surface. "We should talk. We talked yesterday. We exchanged 12 words. 15, she said. I counted." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but the ghost of one, moving through and disappearing fast. He stepped closer, not enough to crowd her, just enough that she could smell the sandalwood again and feel the particular gravity of his presence in a way the mirror made impossible to ignore. 10 years is a long time to not say anything, he said. She turned then, because the mirror felt more intimate than facing him directly, which made no logical sense and was entirely true. She met his eyes, dark brown, steady, older than she remembered but somehow more familiar for it, and kept her, expression neutral through practiced effort. "People lose touch," she said. "It happens. Not like that." The words came out quietly, but they landed hard. Not the way we did. The corridor held them in a strange stillness. Somewhere on a lower floor, an elevator chimed. The city outside was already alive. Sirens 3 blocks east. The low percussion of a delivery truck on 5th Avenue. But up here, in this glass-walled pause between past and present, those sounds belonged to a different world. Lily looked at the mug in his hand, then back at his face. "What do you want, Ethan?" He considered the question seriously, which was somehow worse than a quick answer. "Right now." He set the mug down on the narrow ledge beside the mirror. "I just want to understand why you look at me like you're bracing for something. I'm at work. So am I." He tilted his head slightly. "That's not what I mean, and you know it." She did know it. That was exactly the problem. She turned back to the mirror and resumed wiping, not because it needed it, but because her hands required occupation. In the reflection, she watched him watch her, and she catalogued every detail with the detached precision of someone building a case for a feeling they had no intention of acting on, the slight tension in his jaw, the way his right hand had found the edge of the ledge, like it needed something, solid to hold, the careful, deliberate patience of a man who had learned somewhere along the way that pushing rarely worked. She hated that she noticed all of it. "The east bathroom needs attention," she said. "I should get moving." Of course, he stepped back, giving her room. Professional, clean, no argument. She gathered her caddy and turned the corner without looking back. But halfway down the corridor, she became aware of something she couldn't shake loose for the rest of the morning. Her hands were trembling, faint, barely visible, and had been since the moment she saw their reflections side by side in that glass, looking far more like something than she had any right to let them look. She gripped the cart handle harder. It didn't help. The first time it happened, Lily assumed it was coincidence. She was on the 38th floor, working her way through the sitting room adjacent to the private dining area, when Ethan appeared in the doorway at 6:17 in the morning, with 2 ceramic mugs and an expression of practiced casualness that didn't quite reach his eyes. He was dressed but barely. Dark jeans, a white Henley pushed to the elbows, hair not yet settled into the composed version she'd seen behind the desk. He looked for a disorienting moment, almost exactly like the person she used to know. "Coffee?" He held out the second mug like it was the most natural thing in the world. She looked at it, then at him. "I don't drink coffee on the job. You used to drink it black, no sugar. Before any job, any conversation, any morning that required functioning." He set the mug on the windowsill beside her cart, unhurried, unbothered. "I made 2. You'd be saving me from waste." She didn't pick it up. He didn't push. He leaned against the doorframe with his own mug and looked out at the skyline. The city already assembling itself in the early grey light, cranes blinking red against low clouds, the East River a flat silver line in the distance, and said nothing further. After 4 minutes and a considerable internal argument, Lily picked up the mug. She didn't thank him. He didn't acknowledge it. They both pretended that was fine. The second time, 3 days later, she was already suspicious. Same floor, different room. Same ceramic mug appearing with the same unforced nonchalance. This time she accepted it without the waiting period, which felt like a concession she immediately regretted. He sat on the arm of a reading chair across the room and scrolled through something on his phone while she worked, and the silence between them was almost comfortable, which was somehow more unsettling than tension. The third time she was ready to refuse again. She wasn't. They ended up standing side by side at the panoramic window on the 39th floor, mugs warm in their hands, looking out at the East River, catching the early light in long, broken strips of gold. The building's glass was cold against the morning, and the city below moved with that particular focused energy of New York before 8 a.m. A purposeful, relentless, indifferent to everything happening 40 stories above it. "You still take it the same way," he said. "People don't usually change how they take their coffee. People change a lot of things." He glanced sideways at her. "Coffee turns out to be reliable." She said nothing to that. Outside, a helicopter moved across the skyline in a slow diagonal, its running lights blinking green against the clouds. "Do you like the work?" he asked. Not condescending, genuinely asking. "It's honest work. I know that. I'm asking if you like it." She considered the question seriously, because he seemed to want a serious answer, and she was tired of performing indifference that cost more energy than it saved. "I like that it has a beginning and an end," she said finally. "I like that when I leave the thing is done clean." She paused. "Most jobs aren't like that." He nodded slowly, looking back at the river. "No, most aren't." There was something in the way he said it, a heaviness tucked beneath the agreement, like a man referencing a weight he'd stopped naming out loud. She almost asked. She caught herself. "What about you?" she said instead. "Do you like it? All of this?" He turned to look at her fully, and the morning light hit the side of his face in a way that made the question feel more exposed than she intended. His eyes moved over her features, not intrusively, more like someone reading something they'd nearly memorized and wanted to verify was still accurate. "I'm good at it," he said. "That's not what I asked." The corner of his mouth shifted. "No, it's not." He looked back at the window and didn't finish the answer, and she didn't push. And for a long moment they just stood there with their coffees cooling and the city doing its enormous indifferent thing below them, and Lily became gradually, uncomfortably aware that her shoulder was 2 inches from his, and that she had stopped noticing the cold glass entirely. He said something then, something small, a dry observation about a tugboat moving against the current far below, and she laughed, not politely, not strategically. She laughed the way she used to laugh, sudden and unguarded, and the sound surprised both of them. His expression opened in a way she hadn't seen since Brooklyn, since a different decade, since a version of herself she'd packed away somewhere she thought was permanent. She straightened, set down the mug. "I should get back to work," she said. "Of course." He didn't move from the window. She walked back to her cart and didn't look at him again, but all the way down the corridor and into the elevator, and through the rest of her morning she carried the strange, inconvenient warmth of that laugh like something she hadn't meant to pick up and now had absolutely no idea how to put down. It started with a sound, a sharp, percussive crack from somewhere inside the wall of the third-floor utility corridor, followed by the low, unmistakable hiss of water under pressure, finding an exit it was never supposed to find. Lily heard it at 10:47 at night. She knew the exact time because she had just checked her phone, calculating whether she could finish the corridor wax and still catch the last express train. And for 3 seconds she stood completely still, listening, hoping she'd imagined it. She hadn't. The pipe joint behind the maintenance panel had separated at the coupling, and water was already sheeting down the interior wall and spreading across the floor in a thin, gleaming tide that reflected the fluorescent corridor lighting like something almost beautiful. Lily dropped to her knees, located the emergency shut-off valve beneath the panel, and twisted it hard. The hissing slowed but didn't stop entirely. She reached for her phone to call the building's emergency maintenance line and found, with the specific exhaustion of someone whose night had just extended by 2 hours, that the line rang out. She was composing a text to her supervisor when the elevator at the end of the corridor opened and Ethan stepped out. He was not dressed like a CEO. Dark gray sweatpants, a worn navy pullover with a small tear at the left shoulder seam, white sneakers that had clearly seen regular use. He was carrying, with evident uncertainty, a canvas bag that clinked metallically when he set it down. Inside, she could see an adjustable wrench, 2 sets of pliers, a roll of plumber's tape, and what appeared to be a hardware store receipt that suggested he had stopped somewhere on the way up. Lily stared at the bag, then at him. "The building management app sent me an alert," he said. "Leak on 3, I know. I'm the one who found it." "Right." He looked at the spreading water, then at the bag, then back at her with an expression of honest self-assessment. "I should tell you I have approximately no idea what I'm doing." Something unlocked in her chest without permission. She pressed her lips together against a smile and failed. "I can see that." The guy at the hardware store was very encouraging. "I'm sure he was." She looked into the bag and extracted the plumber's tape and the correct wrench with the efficiency of someone who had, in fact, learned to fix things out of necessity rather than choice. "Hold the flashlight." He held the flashlight. She worked. The repair was temporary. The coupling needed a proper replacement, but the tape and the compression would hold until morning. And the water slowed and stopped with a finality that felt disproportionately satisfying. Lily sat back on her heels and assessed the soaked floor with her hands resting on her knees, breathing steadily. "Impressive," Ethan said quietly. "It's basic plumbing." Still, he sat down against the wall, directly on the wet floor, without hesitation, in his good sweatpants, and looked at her with something open and unhurried. "Thank you." She looked at him sitting on the floor of a utility corridor at 11 at night, billionaire CEO hardware store bag beside him, and felt the careful architecture of her detachment develop a crack she couldn't immediately locate and seal. She sat down too, not close enough. They waited for the emergency plumber she'd finally reached by text, and somewhere in that waiting, the conversation started the way conversations do, when there's nothing left to perform, small, then honest, then quietly enormous. He talked about loneliness the way men rarely do, not as complaint or confession, but as simple fact stated plainly, like describing weather. He said that the larger his world had become, the more specifically he missed things that couldn't be replicated with scale. Certain kinds of quiet, the particular ease of being known by someone before you'd become anything worth knowing. Lily listened without filling the silence with reassurance, which was its own form of respect. When he finished, she spoke. She talked about the years between then and now without strategy or self-protection, about the jobs that paid bills without feeding anything, about the version of herself she'd constructed carefully, around an absence she never named out loud, about learning to find contentment in smaller things, because the larger things had proven too expensive emotionally to keep wanting. Ethan listened the same way she had, completely without interrupting. When she stopped, the corridor was quiet, except for the distant percussion of the city and the occasional drip from the repaired joint. "You always did that," he said. "Did what?" "Made hard things sound reasonable, like they were survivable." She looked at the wet floor. "They were." "Yeah," his voice was low. "They were." The plumber arrived at 11:42, efficient and businesslike, and the spell of the corridor broke cleanly in the way that practical things always dissolve intimate ones. Lily stood, gathered her tools, and exchanged information with the plumber, while Ethan stood slightly to the side, quiet, still present. When the plumber left, she turned to say goodnight. Ethan was already watching her, hands in his pockets, with an expression she recognized from the mirror 3 floors up. That particular unguarded quality she kept telling herself meant nothing. She said goodnight before it could mean something, but walking to the elevator, she was acutely aware that she had just spent an hour on a wet floor talking to Ethan Cole about the architecture of loneliness, and that for the first time in longer than she could honestly calculate, she had not felt lonely at all. The weather app had been wrong all day. It promised a 30% chance of light rain. What arrived instead, just after 6 in the evening, was the kind of storm that makes Manhattan feel small. Sheets of wind-driven rain moving horizontally past the tower windows, lightning fracturing the skyline in white bursts, thunder rolling through the building's bones like a slow, deliberate warning. The East River disappeared entirely behind a wall of grey, and the streets below emptied with the particular speed of a city that knows when to retreat. Lily had been scheduled to leave at 5:30. The subway had other plans. A system-wide delay notification lit up her phone at 5:42, signal. Failure at 59th Street. Estimated resolution unknown, and she stood in the service elevator looking at the message with the resigned calm of someone who had learned that the city's infrastructure had no interest in personal schedules. She texted her sister. She refilled her water bottle. She decided to wait it out somewhere quiet, rather than stand in the lobby with her cart listening to the storm press itself against the glass. The library on the 41st floor was not part of her assigned area. She told herself she was just passing through. The room was long and narrow, lined floor to ceiling with built-in shelves in dark walnut, the kind of architectural feature that felt deliberate and personal in a building that was otherwise all steel and transparency. A pair of deep leather chairs faced a window that was currently performing the storm like a theater screen. Lightning, rain, the occasional shudder of wind finding a gap somewhere in the building's facade. The room smelled of paper and wood and something faintly warm that she couldn't immediately identify. She ran her fingers along the spines without pulling any out. Biographies, architectural theory, an entire shelf of literary fiction organized with visible care, and then stopped. A book had been placed slightly out of alignment with its neighbors, angled outward, as if recently returned in a hurry or kept deliberately accessible. The cover was soft with age, the title pressed into worn cloth binding, The Collected Letters of E.B. White. Beneath it, in handwriting so faded it required leaning close, someone had written on the inside cover, a single line in pencil, the cursive small and careful. "For Ethan, so you'll always know how to say what you mean. Love, Mom." Lily stood very still. She didn't hear him in the doorway. She felt him, the slight shift in the room's atmosphere, the sense of being observed by someone making a deliberate choice not to announce themselves. She didn't startle. She simply became aware gradually and then all at once that she was no longer alone. She turned. Ethan stood at the threshold in a white dress shirt, tie loosened, jacket gone, one hand resting against the doorframe. He was looking at the book in her hands with an expression she had no established category for, something layered and undefended. The look of a person caught by surprise, not by her presence, but by what her Presence had accidentally uncovered. "I didn't know anyone was in here," she said. "I know." He didn't move. "I was going to leave." "You should have." "I know that too." The storm pushed a long, low sound through the building, not quite a rattle, more a resonance, like the structure acknowledging the pressure from outside. The lamp beside the nearer chair threw warm light across the shelves and across him, and the contrast with the violent grey beyond the window made the room feel sealed and specific, a place existing slightly outside the normal rules. Lily looked down at the book. "Your mother's?" "She gave it to me the summer before I left for college." He moved then, slowly, unhurried, crossing the room in measured steps until he stood beside her at the shelf. Close, not inappropriately so, but close enough that she could see the slight irregularity in his breathing and feel the warmth that proximity generates without permission. "She said I spent too much time thinking things I never said out loud." She wasn't wrong. The corner of his mouth moved. "No." He reached for the book, not taking it from her, just touching the spine, his fingers landing precisely where hers rested along the lower edge. The contact was minimal, a centimeter of overlap, skin against skin, barely qualifying as touch by any technical measure. It was not minimal. Lily felt it move up her arm and settle somewhere behind her sternum, with a warmth that was entirely disproportionate to the gesture, and she did not move her hand and he did not move his, and the storm chose that exact moment to deliver a crack of thunder so immediate and physical that the window flexed visibly in its frame. Neither of them flinched. They stood at the edge of something. She could feel its geometry clearly, the precise dimensions of a moment that had not yet decided what it was going to be. His eyes moved from the book to her face with a slowness that felt intentional. And when they found hers, the question in them was plain and patient, and entirely without pressure. She was aware of the rain, the lamp, the faint cedar smell of old paper, the exact distance between them, which had not changed and which they were both very deliberately not changing. She did not step forward. She did not step back, and the storm continued its theater against the glass, indifferent and magnificent. While the two of them stood at the precipice of something neither was quite ready to name and neither, not yet, was willing to leave. Claire Whitmore arrived on a Tuesday. Lily knew who she was before anyone introduced them. She had the particular presence of someone accustomed to being the most prepared person in any room, polished in the specific way that suggested the polish was also a weapon, mid-40s, sharp-boned, in a structured ivory blazer over tailored black trousers, carrying a leather portfolio that probably cost more than Lily's monthly rent. She moved through the penthouse floor with the proprietary ease of someone who considered the space an extension of her own professional territory. Lily was restocking the supply cabinet at the end of the hall when Claire stopped beside her, not in front of her, beside her, close enough to be deliberate, far enough to maintain plausible indifference. "You're the new cleaning staff," Claire said. Not unkindly, not kindly either. Factually, the way someone might identify a piece of furniture. "Lily Carter, Prestige Home Services." She kept her voice even, her hands moving steadily through the supply inventory. "I know." Claire set her portfolio on the hall table and opened it with the brisk efficiency of someone who did not believe in preamble. "I've been Ethan's business partner for 6 years. I manage, among other things, his public profile." A pause precisely calibrated. "Which is considerable." Lily said nothing. She had learned early and well that silence in moments like this cost nothing and revealed less. "He's been through 2 serious PR crises in the last 4 years. Claire continued, her voice carrying the measured cadence of a person delivering a briefing rather than a conversation. "Both personal, both expensive to manage. The board has made it clear that his private life is expected to remain exactly that. You're private and uncomplicated through the Meridian acquisition next quarter." She closed the portfolio with a clean snap. "A $40 billion deal, Miss Carter. The kind that requires a certain image to hold absolutely steady." Lily turned to look at her directly for the first time. Claire's expression was not cruel. That was almost worse. It was reasonable. The expression of a woman who believed entirely in the practical necessity of what she was saying and felt no particular pleasure in saying it. "Sentimental attachments from the past," Claire said with careful, specific emphasis, "have a way of complicating present narratives. especially when the optics are already challenging. Her eyes moved briefly, deliberately to Lily's uniform. I'm sure you understand. Lily held her gaze for 3 full seconds. I understand perfectly, she said. Claire nodded once, retrieved her portfolio, and walked toward the main office without looking back. Her heels were silent on the marble, another thing that felt intentional. Lily stood in the corridor for a long moment after she disappeared. Then she picked up her supply caddy and went back to work. The days that followed had a different texture. Lily moved through the penthouse floor with the same efficiency as always, but the internal adjustment she made was thorough and deliberate. The uniform became armor in a way it hadn't been before. The professional distance she'd been slowly, unconsciously relaxing snapped back into place with a precision that surprised even her. She rerouted her morning schedule to avoid the floors where Ethan, typically appeared early. She stopped leaving her cart in the corridor outside the library. She responded to the building's general staff communications and nothing else. She was good at this. She had practiced it for 10 years before she ever walked into this building. What she hadn't anticipated was how much it would cost the second time. The first morning Ethan appeared on the 38th floor and found no coffee. Waiting, no cart in the corridor, no Lily at the panoramic window. She wasn't there to see his expression, but she was 3 floors down when her phone showed the time as 6:22, and she stood for a moment with her cleaning cloth in her hand and her jaw tight, staring at nothing. She had made the right call. She knew the geometry of situations like this one, had read them correctly her entire adult life. She was a variable that complicated a fixed equation, and the clean solution was to remove herself from it. This was not new information. This was not even painful, she told herself. This was just arithmetic. By Thursday, Ethan had begun appearing in corridors she hadn't rerouted yet, and the encounters were brief and strange, his expression searching in a way he didn't bother to fully conceal, hers composed in a way that required more effort than she would ever admit. Their exchanges were professionally courteous and emotionally evacuated, 2 people performing normalcy over something that had briefly, dangerously been otherwise. Good morning, he said on Thursday, passing her in the hall. Good morning, Mr. Cole, she replied. He stopped walking. She did not. That evening, alone on the subway home, she sat with her headphones in and no music playing and looked at the tunnel, rushing past the dark window, and she recognized with exhausted clarity that the distance she was maintaining, voluntary, necessary, correct, was somehow more painful than the original separation had been, because this time she was choosing it with full awareness, and it turned out that knowing exactly what you were walking away from made each step considerably heavier than walking away blind. The envelope was standard white company letterhead, her name printed neatly in the top left corner, above the Prestige Home Services logo inside 1 page, 11 sentences, every word chosen with the particular care of someone who has drafted the same document 4 times in 2 days and deleted each version for being either too formal or too honest. Lily slid it under the door of Ethan's office at 7:15 in the morning, before he arrived, because handing it to him directly was a version of events she had already decided she couldn't afford. She was on the service elevator, cart-loaded, heading to the 37th floor. When the doors opened on 42 and Ethan stepped in, he was holding the envelope. He hadn't opened it, he was just holding it, the way someone holds something they already understand without reading. And when his eyes found hers in the small steel enclosure of the elevator, the composed CEO expression she had grown accustomed to was entirely, unmistakably absent. The doors closed. Neither of them pressed a floor button. You could have knocked, he said. You weren't in yet. You knew my schedule. She said nothing. The elevator hummed around them, stationary, waiting. He looked down at the envelope. His jaw was set but not hard, more the look of a person exercising deliberate restraint over something that wanted to move differently. When he looked up again, something had shifted in his expression, a loosening of the careful architecture he wore in every meeting, every interview, every public-facing moment she had observed in 3 weeks of proximity. Why are you running again? Lily? The words landed with surgical precision, not aggressive, not accusatory, simply accurate in the way that true things are when delivered without decoration. She felt them in the specific place they were aimed, and the effort required to keep her expression neutral increased considerably. "I'm not running," she said. "I'm making a professional decision. You're making the same decision you made 10 years ago and calling it something different." The elevator's ambient hum filled the silence between them. Outside the building, 42 floors down, the city moved with its usual magnificent indifference. "You don't know why I left 10 years ago," she said quietly. "No," his voice dropped. "That's exactly the problem." He reached past her and pressed the button to hold the elevator. A small mechanical click that sealed the moment with a finality that felt disproportionate to the gesture. Then he turned back and looked at her with an openness that she recognized at some cellular level as costing him something. "I looked for you," he said. "After, not right away, because I was 22 and stupid, and I thought space meant something different than it did. But 6 months later, I went back to the old neighborhood and your mother told me you'd moved and she didn't have a number." A pause. "I tried 4 more times over the next 2 years. Different addresses, mutual contacts. Nothing." Lily's hands were still on the cart handle. She did not move them. "I built most of what's in this building during years when I was trying to fill something specific," he continued, and his voice had the particular quality of a man not performing vulnerability, but simply reporting it, which was infinitely more difficult to dismiss. "The work was real, the ambition was real. But the reason it never felt finished, I knew what that was. I just couldn't locate it." She looked at the envelope in his hand. "Ethan, I'm not asking you to do anything," he said immediately clearly. "I'm not asking you to stay for me. I'm asking you to stay because whatever this is, whatever has been happening in this building for 3 weeks, it deserves more than an envelope under a door." At 7 in the morning, the hold timer on the elevator reached its limit and the doors began to open. Neither of them moved, and the doors bumped gently against their extended position and stayed there. Patient, waiting, Lily looked at him, really looked, the way she had been carefully avoiding, and saw, beneath the tailored shirt and the composed bearing and the decade of accumulated distance, the boy from Brooklyn, who used to lean against a chain-link fence and look at her like she was the only interesting thing in the world. She hated how clearly she could still see him. "I have to finish my shift," she said. Something moved across his face. Not defeat, not acceptance. Something more unresolved than either. "Of course," he said. She walked out of the elevator. He didn't follow, but halfway down the corridor, she stopped walking without entirely meaning to, and stood with one hand on her cart and the other pressed flat against the wall beside her, cool plaster against her palm, steadying herself against something that had nothing to do with balance. Behind her, she heard the elevator doors finally close, and in the silence that followed, standing alone in a marble corridor, 42 floors above a city that didn't care either way, Lily Carter did something she had not allowed herself to do in a very long time. She pressed her fingers to her mouth and cried without a sound for everything the envelope had cost her to write. Lily had known it would be cold. It was nearly midnight. The temperature had dropped to 41 degrees, and she was sitting outside on a cast-iron bench in Sutton Square Park with her jacket zipped to her chin and her hands wrapped around her phone like it could generate actual warmth. The park was small and quiet, tucked between the back of a residential row and the low wall above the east river. And from where she sat, she could see the lights of the coal building rising above the surrounding blocks in clean, vertical lines of glass and steel. She had no logical explanation for why she hadn't gone home. She had left the building at 4:15, taken the elevator to the lobby, walked through the glass doors into the cold early evening air, turned left toward the subway entrance, and then kept walking. Past the entrance, past the next block, around the corner and into the park, where she had sat down on the bench closest to the river wall as if her body had made a decision her brain was still processing paperwork for. That had been 4 hours ago. She watched the building. Not obsessively. She wasn't watching for him specifically, she told herself, which was precisely the kind of lie that held up for approximately 11 minutes before becoming transparent. The lights on 42 were still on. They had been on since she sat down. She had checked twice and then stopped checking, which meant she checked every 20 minutes. The river moved below the wall, dark and indifferent, carrying the reflected city in broken pieces on its surface. At 12:14, footsteps approached on the path behind her, unhurried, familiar in their rhythm before she consciously registered why, and Lily closed, her eyes briefly, not in surprise but in the particular exhaustion of a person whose best-constructed exit has been quietly outmaneuvered. Ethan sat down on the other end of the bench. He was wearing a dark wool overcoat over his dress shirt, hands in his pockets, and he looked at the river for a long moment without speaking. He hadn't brought coffee. He hadn't brought the envelope. He had brought nothing except himself, and the same sleepless quality she recognized because it matched her own. "How long have you been out here?" he asked. "A while. I saw you from the window around 8. A pause. "I didn't come down immediately because I wasn't sure you'd want me to." "What? Changed your mind?" "It got colder." He said it simply, without drama, and she almost smiled despite herself. The river moved. A boat passed slowly in the middle distance, its running lights green and red against the dark water. Lily looked at her hands. "The night you left," she said. Started again more carefully. "I wrote you a letter. The morning after you told me about the scholarship. I sat at my kitchen table for 3 hours, and I wrote everything I hadn't said. During that conversation, all the things I'd been storing up since we were 17, she felt him go, very still beside her. "I never sent it," she continued. "I told myself it was because you deserved the opportunity without the weight of it, that pulling you back wasn't love. It was just need wearing love's clothing." She paused. "I've believed that version for 10 years. I'm not sure anymore that it's true." "What did the letter say?" His voice was careful, low, giving her room. She looked at the building's reflection breaking apart on the water's surface. "That you were the first person who made me feel like the full version of myself was worth keeping," she said. "That I was terrified of that. That I'd been small on purpose my whole life, because small things don't lose as much when they break." A breath. "That I loved you in a way I didn't have a comparison for, and that I was letting you go because I didn't know what else to do with something that size." The park held them in its nighttime quiet, distant. Traffic, the river, the low percussion of the city breathing. Ethan turned toward her on the bench. She felt the movement before she saw it, felt the shift in proximity, and when she finally looked at him, his expression was the most unguarded she had ever seen it, not just since she'd returned, but in all the accumulated years she'd known him. Something irreversibly open, like a door swung wide in a house that had been shut for a decade. "I should have come back sooner," he said. "I should have tried harder. I told myself you'd made a choice and I needed to respect it. But the truth is I was scared of what it meant if you had." His jaw tightened. Briefly, "That version of cowardice has a lot to answer for." She looked at him steadily. He reached over slowly and without ambiguity and took her hand. Not dramatically, not with words attached. He simply placed his hand over hers where it rested on the cold iron bench, warm, certain, present, and held it with the quiet resolve of someone who had made a decision and was no longer interested in walking it back. Lily looked down at their hands, then at the river. Then, after a long moment, she turned her hand over beneath his and held on. The building's lights reflected on the water below, the city enormous and indifferent around them, and neither of them spoke again for a long time, because the silence finally was carrying exactly the right things. The photo appeared on a Tuesday morning at 6:47. Lily was on the subway, standing in the packed car between a woman with a stroller and a teenager with headphones, scrolling through her phone with one hand and holding the overhead bar with the other when the notification appeared in her news feed. She almost kept scrolling. Celebrity gossip aggregators had learned long ago how to format headlines for accidental engagement, but the building in the UI background of the thumbnail image stopped her thumb mid-movement. She knew that building. She enlarged the photo. It had been taken from across the street, through a long lens, in the amber-toned darkness of late night, the park bench, the river wall behind it, the coal building rising in the background. The composition was almost artistic in its accidental precision. 2 figures, close together, one in a dark overcoat and one in a grey jacket, hands joined on the bench between them. Faces turned slightly toward each other in the particular configuration of people sharing something private. The headline beneath it read, Coal Industries CEO Ethan Cole in late night. Rendezvous, but who is she? By the time Lily reached her stop, there were 47 similar results. She stood on the platform while the train pulled away and read them with the focused, airless calm of someone processing information that requires all available emotional resources to metabolize. The articles were not uniformly cruel. Some were merely curious. The breathless speculation of entertainment journalists filling column space, but several were pointed in ways that required no interpretation. Mystery woman in service uniform. One outlet had already identified her employer from the logo on her jacket, visible in the higher resolution version of the image. Another had found her full name from what appeared to be a building staff directory and had paired it with a neighborhood in Brooklyn and the phrase "a source close" to the Cole household described as a domestic employee. She read that one twice. Then she put her phone in her pocket and walked up the station stairs into the cold morning air and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, breathing deliberately, watching the traffic move. Her apartment was a one-bedroom on the 4th floor of a walk-up in Astoria. Small, clean, organized with the particular efficiency of someone who had learned to make a limited space feel intentional. She had painted the kitchen wall a dark green 2 summers ago, hung 3 framed prints above the sofa, kept a small collection of plants on the windowsill that she watered with. Genuine care. It was a life assembled thoughtfully from available materials, and she had been, if not entirely content, genuinely at peace with it. She pulled her bag from the closet and set it open on the bed. She was methodical about it, folded things first, then the items from the bathroom shelf, then the small framed photo from the nightstand that she wrapped in a shirt, before placing it carefully at the bottom. She worked with the quiet focus of someone who had packed quickly before and knew that thinking too much during the process was the primary obstacle. Her phone rang 4 times. She let it go to voicemail. On the 5th call, she answered, Lily. Ethan's voice was controlled but carrying something underneath it. Tautness like a wire pulled to its functional limit. Don't do what I think you're doing. I'm being practical. You're disappearing. I'm protecting what you built. She sat on the edge of the bed, one hand flat on the open bag. $40 billion, Ethan. The Meridian acquisition, the board, all of it. One photograph and it starts to unravel. I'm not going to be the reason for that. That's my decision to make, not when I'm the variable. Her voice was steady. She had practiced this, not literally, but in the way the mind rehearses necessary conversations. I know what I am in this story. I know how it reads. And I know that loving someone isn't sufficient justification for dismantling everything they've spent a decade constructing. A silence that lasted long, enough to have weather. Don't go anywhere, he said finally. I'm coming. Ethan, 40 minutes. The call ended. She sat with the phone in her hand and looked at the half-packed bag on the bed, and then at the green kitchen wall, and then at the plants on the windowsill that needed watering and would need watering again next week and the week after, assuming she was here to do it. She did not finish packing, but she did not unpack either. She was still sitting on the edge of the bed, 38 minutes later, when she heard footsteps on the stairs outside. Not the elevator, because there was no elevator. Just 4 flights of narrow staircase that she'd climbed 10,000 times. And then a knock at the door. Not urgent, steady, she opened it. Ethan was standing in the hallway in dark jeans and a simple charcoal jacket. No tie, no driver, no security. Alone, the way a person arrives when they want to be understood as exactly themselves, and nothing more. Under his left arm, pressed against his side with the careful deliberateness of an object that mattered, was the worn cloth-bound book from the library on 41. He looked at her, then at the bag visible through the bedroom door behind her, then back at her with an expression that was not a plea and not a demand, but something more, difficult to deflect than either. I didn't come as a CEO, he said quietly. I came as the person who loved you before he had anything worth losing. His eyes held hers with a steadiness that cost him something visible. The choice is yours, Lily. It has always been yours. The hallway light flickered once, the old building doing what old buildings do. And Lily stood in the doorway with one hand on the frame and looked at the man, holding his mother's book in the stairwell of her walk-up in Astoria, and felt The entire careful architecture of her certainty begin, slowly and irrevocably, to shift. The rain started at 8:13, not the violent theatrical storm of the library night. This was quieter, more personal. The kind of steady urban rain that turns Manhattan sidewalks into mirrors and makes the city feel closer to itself somehow. All its edges softened and its distances compressed. It arrived without announcement, the way the most significant things tend to, and within minutes it was simply present and continuous, as if it had always been there and would be for some time. Lily opened the door wider. She didn't say anything, she didn't need to. The gesture was its own complete sentence, and Ethan understood it the way people understand things that have been true for a long time and are only now being spoken aloud. He stepped inside, rain-damp at the shoulders, and stood in her small entryway while she closed the door behind him. And neither of them rushed the moment into something it wasn't ready to be. He looked around the apartment the way someone looks at a place they want to understand the dark green kitchen wall, the 3 framed prints above the sofa, the plants on the windowsill with their precise and careful arrangement, the half-packed bag visible through the open bedroom door. He took it in without comment slowly, the way you read something that matters. "You painted it green," he said finally. "2 years ago. It suits you." He set the book down on the small table by the Dorotis gently, the way you set down something that belongs somewhere, and turned to face her. "It all suits you." Lily leaned against the kitchen doorframe with her arms loosely crossed, not defensively but in the way of someone who is present and uncertain and choosing to be both. The rain moved against the window behind her in long wavering lines. "I didn't finish packing," she said. "I can see that. That's not a decision. It's just I hadn't finished." "I know." He held her gaze steadily. "I'm not here to collect a decision, Lily. I'm here because the alternative was staying in a building with 42 floors, and not a single room that felt like anything without you somewhere in it." A pause. "That's all." She looked at him for a long moment, the rain-damp shoulders, the simple clothes, the absence of every professional layer that usually composed him in the building, and felt the last of the careful, necessary distance she had maintained dissolve not dramatically but quietly, the way tension leaves a body when it finally accepts that holding on is costing more than letting go. "I wrote you another letter," she said. His expression shifted. "Last night, after you called." She moved to the kitchen counter and picked up 2 folded pages covered in her handwriting, the ink slightly uneven in places, the way handwriting gets when the hand is moving faster than it means to. She held them out. He crossed the small apartment in 4 steps and took the pages from her hand. And in the transfer their fingers met, and neither moved away, and the contact extended well past its functional purpose into something that had its own intention. He read it there, standing in her kitchen, in the rain-softened light of a Tuesday morning, while she watched his face move through the words she'd written in the dark, hours before dawn, the real ones, the ones without strategy, the ones that said clearly and without defense that she had been afraid her entire adult life of wanting something she couldn't make smaller and safer, and that she was exhausted by the effort of it, and that whatever came next, she wanted it to include him in ways she was finally done pretending she didn't. When he finished, he folded the pages with the same care she'd used, wrapping the photograph in her bag, and he looked at her with an expression she had no established category for, and didn't need one. He closed the distance between them, unhurried, giving her every opportunity to redirect. And when he reached her, he did not kiss her immediately, did not rush what had taken 10 years to arrive back at its starting point. He simply brought his hand up to the side of her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone with a gentleness that was its own kind of eloquence, and looked at her from close range with all the patience of a man who had learned the hard way what it cost to leave things unsaid. "Hi," he said softly. Something broke open in her chest, warm and irreversible. "Hi," she said back. And then he kissed her, and the rain continued its quiet percussion against the window, and the city moved below with its enormous indifference to everything that was not its own business. And in the small green-walled kitchen of a 4th-floor walk-up in Astoria, 2 people who had been circling the same gravity for a decade finally stopped, moving away from it. Later, much later, when the rain had settled into a lighter, more companionable version of itself. They stood together at the kitchen window, with mugs of coffee going slowly cold on the counter behind them. Manhattan was visible in the middle distance, its skyline standing in the grey morning air with the particular confidence of a city that has seen everything and retains the capacity to be beautiful anyway. Lily's head rested against his shoulder. His arm was around her. The book sat on the table by the door where he'd left it, cover up, slightly open at the spine as if waiting to be read. Outside, the world continued at its usual velocity. Inside, neither of them was in any hurry. "The coffee's getting cold," she said. "I know," he didn't move. "We should probably drink it." "Probably." His chin rested lightly against her hair. "In a minute." She looked at Manhattan through the rain-streaked glass and the towers, the bridges, the river catching what light the clouds allowed, and felt, with a clarity that required no analysis and no qualification, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be, not in a fairy tale, not in the story she'd imagined at 22 when she thought happiness had a specific shape and address, in something better and quieter, truer, built from real materials, by two people who had earned the understanding that love is not the absence of difficulty, but the deliberate, repeated choice to remain present inside it. The coffee went cold on the counter. Neither of them moved for a long time. She had spent 10 years making herself small enough to survive. He had spent 10 years building an empire large enough to fill a silence that had a name he wouldn't say out loud, and in the end, what brought them back wasn't circumstance or fate. It was two people finally, brave enough to stop running from the one thing that had always been true. Some loves don't expire, they wait, patient and undiminished. For the moment, you stop being afraid of them. And maybe that's the real question, not whether love survives time, but whether you'll have the courage to let it. If this story moved something in you, subscribe so you never miss the next one. Leave a like and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're listening from. Your presence here means everything.